Okay, I wanted to wait until I'd calmed down a little bit before I weighed in on this, but I can't wait anymore. I didn't even bother setting up the camera or the green screen. And I am gonna do my best to stay under control here, but I am pissed off right now. So, news broke yesterday that things have broken down between Sony and Disney/Marvel Studios, and Sony has chosen to end the relationship and pull out, taking the Spider-Man film rights with them. Supposedly. IO9 is hinting that it's not a done deal and that talks are ongoing or something. So maybe the situation is still developing, maybe the media is jumping the gun on this slightly, we don't know. But what we do know is that as of right now, at least for the time being, Spider-Man is no longer a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Which is horrible for so many reasons. First of all, if this is for real, the MCU takes a massive kick in the balls. They just anointed Peter Parker as the heir apparent to Tony Stark. They dubbed him the next Iron Man. He was poised to take a really big role in the MCU going forward as arguably the new lead character. Well, that's all off the table now. And then there's the issue of the Spider-Man solo films, which are completely fucked if this happens. Big chunks of Peter's supporting cast are MCU characters that Sony won't be able to use. Can't use the Avengers, can't use Nick Fury, can't use Happy Hogan. They probably won't be able to reference anything from the previous two films, which would make continuing the story where it left off in Far From Home almost impossible. And if that doesn't hurt them at the box office enough, they're also not going to have the MCU brand to piggyback off of anymore. The MCU brand that was highly instrumental in Far From Home being such a financial powerhouse for the studio, can't do that anymore. And you know what happens when you can't piggyback off the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Tom Rothman? You know what you get when you can't ride the wave of the MCU? You get Into the Spider-Verse. And you can brag about the Oscar that movie won all you want. Best animated feature, whoop-de-fucking-do. But at the end of the day, it's still the lowest grossing Spider-Man film in the franchise by a significant margin. Meanwhile, Far From Home crossed $1 billion recently. It's officially Sony's biggest movie of all time thanks to what Marvel did with it. The Spider-Man film brand is stronger than ever thanks to its association with the MCU, but you're so butthurt that Disney and Marvel want a more 50-50 split when they were doing all the hard stuff when it came to writing, casting, and producing these movies that you back out of this extremely cushy arrangement and completely shoot yourself and the Spider-Man film franchise right in the foot. What the fuck is wrong with you? Alright, these are some articles from Screen Rant about the situation that I want to go through real quick. The breakdown of the Marvel-Sony deal means that Spider-Man 3 and 4 may not be a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe at all. In early 2015, Marvel Studios and Sony Pictures reached an unprecedented deal that allowed Spider-Man to be rebooted as part of the MCU. Blah, blah, blah. The new young Spider-Man has become a hit on the big screen, with Spider-Man Far From Home becoming Sony's highest-grossing film of all time. Why on earth you would want to walk away from a deal like that, I have no earthly clue. God damn it, Tom Rothman. In spite of this box office success, or perhaps because of it, the partnership between Marvel and Sony has broken down. Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige was in favor of continuing the relationship, but unfortunately Sony and Disney were unable to reach an agreement. According to Deadline, Disney wanted a 50-50 co-financing arrangement on future movies, and Sony refused point-blank to agree to this. Why? Seems like a pretty good arrangement to me. 50-50 co-financing arrangement, so I assume that means that Disney would share in the cost of the movie and also share the profits. I fail to see how that's a bad thing. Okay, so Sony would be taking less profits on the movie, but they'd also be spending less money on the movies to produce them. So how is that bad? Seems pretty fair, considering Marvel and Disney are the only reasons why these movies are as profitable as they are. Okay, where were you when Marvel Studios came along to bail your asses out? Amazing Spider-Man 2? Yeah, that worked out great. In Sony's view, Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home have established a creative template that they believe they can follow in order to produce more successful Spider-Man movies. Yeah, they won't be able to do that. You know why? Because Homecoming and Far From Home are very intrinsically tied into the continuity of the MCU, continuity which Sony will not be able to reference. So they'd have to go off in a completely different direction, rebooting, if not completely retconning everything that happened in the previous two films. So story-wise, you've completely screwed yourselves. The key question, however, is just how future Spider-Man films will relate to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Well, if this is for real, they won't. At all. Both Tom Holland and director John Watts are reportedly signed up for another 2 Spider-Man movies, and that gives Sony a couple of options. On the one hand, they could choose to carry out a soft reboot of the Spider-Man franchise, and it'd have to be more than a soft reboot, keeping the same stars as well as the same tone and style. Well, they wouldn't be able to keep a lot of the same stars because many of those stars are MCU characters. Wouldn't be able to do that. Or move forward with another version entirely. Yeah, more than likely that's what would end up happening. And we've seen what Sony's version of Spider-Man is. Remember Amazing Spider-Man 2? Remember Spider-Man 3? That's what we'd be in for. Alternatively, they could choose to pick up from Spider-Man Far From Home's post-credit cliffhanger and continue with the wall-crawler story absent of any future overt references to the MCU. Yeah, and without those overt references to the MCU, that would make picking up the story where Far From Home left off incredibly difficult, if not outright impossible, as I said before. Disney reportedly wanted a 50% budget profit split, while Sony were keen to keep the situation as it was. Okay, so 50% budget profit split, so Disney would put up half the money and also take half the profit. Considering they're doing all the work here, that seems like a pretty damn good deal to me. And again, you might be taking in less money, Sony, but you're also incurring less risk because you're spending less money on it. Things have been complicated by Sony's attempts to grow their own universes with Venom's box office smash, Into the Spider-Verse's Oscars showing that they can actually be successful on their own. Can they? Can they really? Venom was a fucking fluke, okay? That movie was a dumpster fire that somehow ended up making a lot of money. God knows how. God, that movie sucked. Into the Spider-Verse's Oscar, yes, okay, Into the Spider-Verse was a critical darling, but it's still the lowest grossing film in the franchise. You can't just rest on your laurels and wave that Oscar around and think that means the movie was a huge smash hit. Yes, it was successful, but compared to the other Spider-Man movies, it's still the lowest grossing film. Per the last reports, the situation is in flux with the severity of the rift being downplayed and the possibility of restarting talks raised. That would be a very good thing for all involved, not least Marvel. While many have played up how much the Sony brand has been rehabilitated by the MCU connection, the loss of Spider-Man could be disastrous for the Marvel Cinematic Universe going forward in both a story and production form. Yeah, no kidding. There might still be hope that Sony and Disney reach a deal to continue working together, but at this point it seems like both parties are unwilling to budge when it comes to their stipulations. At the end of the day, if both studios decide to walk away from this partnership, it will be a lose-lose situation, as they basically scrap everything that they built with regard to the Spider-Man IP over the last few years. Exactly. There's no winners here if this goes through. It's in everyone's best interest to continue the arrangement. Even if it's a 50-50 split, that's still a really good deal for everyone involved. If both sides walk away from the table, everybody gets screwed. Is Tom Rothman just that dead set on beating Bob Iger and Kevin Feige in a pissing contest? Is he so intent on doing that he would completely screw his own company and the Spider-Man IP in the process? On top of that, there's also the complication over how to handle the character moving forward if he gets uprooted from the MCU. This iteration is so tightly ingrained in the franchise that he's tipped to be the face of the universe as it goes through a transitional phase. Yeah, exactly. Spider-Man is very integral to the MCU right now. If you take him out of there, you've just got this giant hole that can't really be filled. So creatively, it just puts you between a rock and a hard place with no real way to get out of it. And then Sony are fucked too, because they can't really follow the narrative that was created by the first two films, because they probably won't be able to reference the first two films, won't be able to use a lot of characters from the first two films, so they basically just have to retcon everything, which is going to seriously impact the way the future Spider-Man solo movies are received at the box office. Obviously, while the public is not privy to the ongoing negotiations, this swift outcry from them can still ultimately affect the outcome of this ongoing debacle. Admittedly, not everyone is thrilled with Marvel Studios' take on the superhero. Really? Really? But there's no denying that a majority of the fans love this iteration of the character. Sony can easily take over creatively. Really? You really want to give the creative reins back to Amy Pascal and Sony? We've seen what happens when Sony has creative control. You really want to go back to that? Since both director John Watts and Tom Holland are supposedly returning for more Spider-Man movies, not to mention that it's already a well-established film series. Yes, that they would basically have to veer away from now because they're no longer connected to the MCU, so they wouldn't be able to reference anything in the MCU, you idiot. They also proved that they're able to craft a great Spider-Man movie with the critical acclaimed Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. which is the lowest grossing film in the franchise. And also, Into the Spider-Verse existed in a vacuum. It's basically a what-if story, so they could do whatever the hell they wanted. They won't be able to do that with any future live-action Tom Holland Spider-Man movies because it's part of an ongoing story. The only way they can do that is to just kind of destroy the story that's come before. However, they're still risking turning off the fans if they simply uproot the character from the universe and plug it into their budding own. They're going to have to make so many fundamental changes to the Tom Holland Spider-Man films that, like I said, is basically just going to be a giant retcon. That is inevitably going to piss people off, and it's going to lead to diminishing box office returns. And why you would do this after Far From Home gave you your biggest hit in the history of the studio, this is a complete disaster. And no one benefits from this. No one. Not Disney, not Marvel, certainly not Sony. Sony are a fucking clown car that just happened to veer off the road and crash into a couple financial hits along the way. I don't know how the hell Venom made as much money as it did, and I'd say it's pretty good odds that the sequel will not be nearly as successful. And then Into the Spider-Verse, okay, critical darling, congratulations. But it was a what-if story. It's not the same thing as continuing a story from a previously established series of films that you won't be able to follow up on properly because the MCU connection is not there anymore. It's not the same thing. You have fundamentally fucked yourselves for no reason. However, an update indicates a new deal can be reached. Now Variety reports one of their sources said a deal can still be made between Sony and Disney/Marvel Studios. When Sony was reached for comment by IO9, a representative said the dispute between studios is over a producer credit and negotiations are still ongoing. Alright, so this gives me a little bit of hope. Maybe the story is not over yet, and there's still a chance things can be worked out. Maybe there's a speck of hope that this can still be fixed, but when you're dealing with studios and egos and Tom fucking Rothman, the Jar Jar Binks of movie studio executives, that does not fill me with a great deal of confidence. This whole situation is a complete disaster for all parties involved. I'm pissed off. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, follow me on Twitter. I'll talk to you guys later.